Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming back from the break. My name is Anant Mistry. I am the Chief AI Officer for Global Technology Solutions. And welcome to the section on national defense and artificial intelligence, the power of public-private partnership. We have Amy Henninger, we have Ramesh Menon, and we have Rana Gujral, and hopefully we will have Esube Bekele. I'm not sure where Esube is, but we'll send out a search party for him. He was here? Okay. So please do get settled in, and we will get started.
So good afternoon. To get started, we need more bodies in here, right? Because it's too cold. So everybody needs to do jumping jacks or recruit a friend to come see us. I'm not sure what, but it's quite cold up here. Amy Henninger, Senior Advisor for Advanced Computing, Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology Directorate. If you were here this morning, you heard my leadership, the Undersecretary for Science and Technology, Honorable Dmitry Kuznetsov, give the keynote in preparedness. It's my privilege to moderate this next panel with our distinguished panelists on private and public partnerships. And we have an outstanding panel to speak to that topic, a great lineup of speakers, including Ramesh Menon, who's going to speak to the government perspective, Rana Gujral, who will speak to the industry perspective, and if we can find him, I think there's a Subi back there. He specializes in bringing those two entities together in his position at In-Q-Tel. So Ramesh was appointed as the CTO at DIA in March of 2021. As DIA's authoritative information technology expert, Ramesh is responsible for technology and strategy planning, experimentation, and emerging technology solution architecture supporting DIA and IC priorities, including Five Eye partners. These technology strategies include support for the CIO's business and mission partners' capabilities on JWICS and in the DODIS Enterprise. Rana is an entrepreneur and CEO at Behavioral Signals, a cognitive AI company building acoustics-based deep learning technology. Rana is a columnist at TechCrunch and Forbes and has been recognized as among the top 40 voice AI influencers to follow by SoundHound, Entrepreneur of the Month by CIO Magazine, Top 10 Entrepreneurs to Follow by Huffington Post, and AI Entrepreneurs to Watch by Inc. Magazine. Rana holds management and finance and engineering degrees from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Sloan, the University of Massachusetts, and MLP Rohikant University. Did I get that close enough? Thank you. And Isubi, welcome. I'm really glad you showed up.
So sorry.
No, it's great. We're glad to have you here. Isubi is a senior technical architect at In-Q-Tel, where he leads investments and strategic insights in applied AI and generative AI, as well as quantum software, and has additional interests in advanced and next-gen compute. Before In-Q-Tel, Isubi received his PhD from Vanderbilt, followed by a research fellowship at the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory. He also had some startup experience and is very active in the research community. So welcome to our panelists. Thank you for being here. The recently released Executive Order 14110, Safe, Secure, and Trustworthy Development and Use of Artificial Intelligence, provides guidance on the federal government's roles and responsibilities, particularly in advancing solutions that the private sector might not address organically on their own. The EO calls out a number of private-public sector initiatives to include provision for the incentives of continuous improvement of procured AI, promoting and fostering competition in the vendor space, and maximizing the value to agencies when relying on contractors to use and enrich federal government data for the purposes of AI development and operation. So to get started in the context of this executive order, I'd like to ask each of the panelists to address one of those topics. So Rana, let's start with you, and let's kick this off. So from your perspective as our industry panelist, what are some of the ways the government can promote and foster competition in the vendor space? And I'm really interested in knowing which you think is the best way.
Yeah, thanks. Oh, this is loud. Thank you for having me here. I mean, first off, it's a fairly comprehensive executive order, I believe almost 100 pages or so, and probably one of the most detailed in the recent history. But, you know, so I combed through it to the best I can when it came out to understand how it impacts companies like us. There's a lot of interesting elements in there, some useful, some, I'd say, in some ways problematic, or in some ways confusing, especially the aspects around some, you know, privacy controls that need to be rethought from a perspective of data sharing, which are always, you know, a problem for a smaller company, smaller AI company that is trying to find its footing among a very concentrated field that has come about in this space right now. And so I think, you know, my perspective to answer your specific questions, I have a lot of thoughts on many different aspects of this EO. We can probably get into that later. What I see is, I mean, first off, I mean, it's a very tall order. Regulating AI is a very tall order. But you need to regulate it, just like you had to regulate nuclear power and cars or energy or whatever that might be, right? So anything that potentially could cause harm, and AI certainly can, you have to regulate, and it's the government's job to lead that process. But then how do you actually do it? It's still an evolving field, so to some level, it has to continue to be reactive. It is reactive right now, and it will continue to be reactive. But what I see potentially missing is a deeper understanding of the sub-verticals and sub-industries, because I feel that regulation needs to be use case and industry specific rather than big broad strokes. Because there are certain aspects which may need to be regulated harder, faster, and maybe with even a higher priority, like, you know, aspects like, you know, for example, like deepfakes, and other aspects that may potentially impact cybersecurity and other, you know, other use cases may be more relevant, needs a higher focus than necessarily sort of, you know, a broad sort of brush on all aspects of model development and data sharing that you know that might be required as part of those regulations. So I feel those are some of the things that might be things that that can be done as sort of a precursor. I mean, currently these orders are still voluntary. I mean, they're not legislative. So from that perspective. And I do agree with that, because I feel like, you know, taking an example from the internet, internet kind of self-regulates pretty well, and I think over time AI industry will self-regulate, but there needs to be some leadership around sort of setting the stakes. But what I'd like to see is more use case specific regulations come out versus sort of broad terms that may not necessarily be very applicable or even very even enforceable.
Okay, great, thank you. Ramesh, I'm going to ask you the same question, but with just a little different twist to it. In terms of the EO, and we'll get, like Rana said, we're going to get more into the EO as we talk throughout the panel. But what are some of the ways, in your view, that the government can provide incentives for continuous improvement of procured AI systems?
Well, we procure information first, that's for sure. Now, we need a free, fair, competitive ecosystem which enables all the participants to participate in that market, and not just one or two large digital platform vendors. So there are many things we do. Typically, on our large procurements and contracts, we do set aside small business things in addition to CBIRS and other innovation contracts. So that's definitely happening, especially with the non-traditional contracting models. For example, at DIA, we have something called Needipedia. You can look at it. It's publicly available. You submit a 5-page paper, and we engage that particular company, which is very well suited for smaller companies and especially people who have IP but don't have the scale. So there are two aspects. Yes, we do need to create the foundational market with the economic incentives for the market to thrive and grow, and government has some responsibility from that perspective. But at the same time, I believe we are at a stage in history where technology is moving at a very fast pace. The rate of change happening in technology is on a monthly or weekly basis, not years. Right? Last year, this time, OpenAI launched GPT, and now people think it's been around for a long time. That's not true. And policies are keeping up. So first of all, I have to thank the White House for coming out with a regulatory framework that is a step in the right direction. There will be more to follow. We are looking at from a National Security Council what it means. We are looking from different dimensions. Soon there will be. We just want to make sure that we control the machines and machines are not controlling us. That's bottom line, right? So I would say it's an explainable, responsible AI that complies with US Constitution. Please don't break any laws, right? That's a broader goal. I mean, we want the markets to grow and create incentives for the vendors to participate, and that's all there. But at the same time, there are things we don't know. 5 years from now, the discussions will be very different. We have some initial rumblings around AGI and all those things, but it's not necessarily there. So far, we are looking in terms of decision support, decision augmentation, and decision automation for human-machine teaming and machine-machine teaming, right? But with AGI, those will be flipped upside down. Your requirements are very different. So we just want to make sure we still have a responsibility towards the American public. That's number one goal, right? And people are taken care of, and it's a sustainable change for human-machine teaming.
Okay, thank you, Ramesh. Nicely done. So finally, Asubi, given that that the market has increased, like Ramesh said, and that we have proper incentives in place, and we have proper amounts of vendor competition in place, as the expert here in integrating, right, public and private sector and maximizing the goodness of that, how do you maximize the value to the agencies when we're relying on contractors and the private sector to use and enrich the federal government data for purposes of AI development and use?
Yeah, so that's a good question, right? So we at Inkitel are very fortunate to sit at the intersection of these three communities, right? The venture capital, the startups, like Pranas, and government. And so we vet, the startups technology, because most of this generative AI innovation is happening today at the startups, right? And mostly the big tech is basically like playing the role of a strategic investor, right? They're providing the infrastructure, the money required for these top foundation model providers. And touching on how, first let me touch on how the EO specifically kind of is designed, to foster competition, but at the same time, there are clauses that we're looking at that kind of sound like, they might actually disrupt competition, right? Specifically for smaller players to compete, the larger, well-funded, startups. And then I'll get into how we are working to bring those innovations back to government to draw more value. So with regard to the EO, we actually have a working group set up, and we're trying to even bring in our portfolio companies, pipeline companies, trying to see what they feel, how that EO is going to impact them, be it in a positive way, fostering competition, but also creating a regulatory burden on them. And as a small startup, the burden sometimes could be onerous enough that they can't survive compared to OpenAI or Anthropic, right? And so there is a lot of nice clauses, including the ones that you mentioned, that kind of, are fostering competition, right? And trying to like help innovation. For instance, even going as far as like, making it easier for these startups to hire talent, right? Like external talent, all of that, right? Which is great. We can work on that, we can expand on that, and we can even work on infrastructure learning from the other, we'll get into all of that later. But there is this EO and some of the other legislations we're seeing in the Senate, that people are discussing, are kind of like influenced by these AI doomers. There is a doomers and technology enthusiast group around this technology. And there is a fear from the smaller startups, like for instance in the EO, it says after a certain model, there is like a reporting requirement, right? Would that be too much onerous on the smaller startups? So that's a concern that we're looking at.
Okay, thank you, Asubi. Continuing on this theme of the EO, Rana, in your view, are the current AI regulations and the executive order on AI effectively guiding industry's progress? And how do you assess the direction we're taking in regulating AI?
Yeah, I think it's a step in the right direction, but I feel like we're struggling with it. I think it's a multifaceted problem, some of which Sube touched on and Ramesh also mentioned. And in our opinion, I mean, there's a balance between putting in the guardrails and safety and security. We have sort of seen recently from the OpenAI saga that it's even more imperative that we move fast. If there was ever a doubt that we need to do this, I mean, those have vanished. Looking at sort of some of what's happened. But the question always is, and I'll ask this question, and this is actually my favorite question to ask all new and interesting people that I meet who I feel are qualified to answer this, is like, how would you regulate AI? What's your specific ideas in order to do that? And I've yet to hear any answers that provide a meaningful, constructive approach towards it. There's a school of thought that you can't really regulate. You potentially, look at your current laws and see where there are gaps. I mean, there's laws around, misuse of chemistry. I mean, you obviously, can take chemistry and, cause chemical warfare. And there's laws around you can't just sort of build a nuclear weapon in your backyard, right? So it's regulated. Or for that matter, build your own car and put it on the highway. I mean, actually, putting a car on the highway requires potentially, I think someone told me, to build a car and put it on in the market on a highway, you have to go through maybe, I think there's like 25,000 regulatory line items that you have to get through. And so a simple item like that is regulated heavily. So of course, I mean, there's going to be a lot of regulations around AI. But the larger question here is not that should we be doing it. Of course, everybody agrees to it, which is like, what do you need to do to build an effective guardrails if things go wrong? Part of the solution, in my opinion, is to look at where there are gaps and up the ante on penalties if there are situations where there's malicious intent of some sort. And there will be bad actors, but the early bad actors will have to pay a huge price. And of course, you have to deal with the state bad actors in a different manner. There's nothing, your laws don't apply to them. So you have to deal with it differently. Build your defenses, right? And so you have to sort of think about proactively, what do you need to do if things do go wrong? What tools and measures you need to build? And I see very little conversation about that today. And there's in fact, that's a whole different tangent, but, we've gone from talks about AGI being a fringe topic to, a lot of people talking about it, to now almost there's a consensus that it will happen, and the debate is when, whether it's X years or Y years, but I think we know that we're going to get there. So the question is, when you get there, what is the impact, and how do we live with it, right? So I think a part of that conversation needs to be about proactively thinking about what happens in both the good situations and the bad situations from a societal aspects, and build those in. And the last bit is, I guess, more around what I touched on earlier. There are certain specific aspects of AI that are vastly problematic in certain use cases, which you see certain trajectories towards already. So you kind of sort of see, like deepfakes is one example, but then there's also other issues that might be pertaining to encryption or cybersecurity or just data privacy in general. I think privacy is a big issue. We are lax overall on privacy in the United States, and I think AI is going to accelerate that whole situation in a big, massive way. So those are the areas that need specific focus. Like so if I go through the executive order, I don't see a specific focus on any specific areas that I see as a high problem. They're just broad strokes across the board, which then, again, are not as effective. Then the other aspect is, the team. I mean, you need a team. This is a very, very complex equation, and you need a diverse body of people who can bring in their inputs towards how to solve this problem. And I don't see that diversity yet, and I think that's a problem. I'd love to see certain folks who I feel have a good handle on sort of the potentiality of both the good and the bad to be part of this decision and this conversation, and bring them in, have a conversation with them, and get their ideas. And the top researchers. I mean, we have the best talent pool in this country. If you look at AI, I think we still have a significant lead. It's shrinking, but we still have a lead. And we have all the minds who can solve this right here. And they just need to be involved in that process, involved in that conversation. And I don't see that happening. And so I think that there's a lot of thoughts I have, but I'd say, those are some of the gaps, and they need to be plugged in relatively quickly because things are moving quite fast. There's, I don't know if Sube and Ramesh will agree with this or not, but I recently heard someone say this, so it's not my original quote, but I really believe in this, that, the hype around AI is not true because it is way underhyped. Because, and I do feel so because, most people think it's overhyped. I feel it's underhyped because, again, it depends on your exposure to what you're seeing and what you're looking at. And when you see certain things evolving and certain things progressing that you, didn't expect to progress, you can sort of connect the dots and say, oh, wow, yes, we're definitely getting there, and you just don't know when and how, but it's definitely moving quite fast. So that's how I feel.
Yeah, no, terrific answer, response there. I especially appreciate, sort of pointing out the need for really comprehensive regulatory frameworks, right? And how many different facets there are to that. I've been an advocate for a long time, not comprehensive, but I think it's a first step. My little brother's a civil engineer, and before he can sign off on plans to build a bridge, he has to get his PE, right? And he has to stamp those plans with his PE. And even before AI, I thought software engineering should regulate itself in a similar way, where we have sort of professional certifications and standards in order to practice. So Asubi, I want to continue on this theme of the EO and the AI regulations that we've been talking about, but I'm really interested in understanding the implications of those relative to our Western allies. And I'm specifically interested in what kinds of effects you're seeing in terms of how they encourage or stifle innovation in the startup community writ large.
Yeah, so that's a good question. Our Western allies also are kind of, working on their own versions of, the EU, right? Like the EU has been working on the AI Act for a very long time. They're, I think, about to release that, and it's way watered down from the original version, and it started from before ChatGPT, right? Like when we were talking about predictive AI and not even generative AI. And now it has become even a more significant issue, right? As far as Sam Altman and OpenAI basically protesting some provisions of the AI Act. And then we saw what happened in UK, the summit, and then what followed, right? So the UK summit is pretty interesting in that aspect because it was originally driven by okay, so the vast majority of consensus from big tech and Silicon Valley, like the big foundation model providers, has been, without control, AI is going to be basically the doomers, right? Like AI is going to kill us, AI is going to, get out of control. We need to provide, those controls way beforehand before we get to AGI. And then what it turns out to be is everybody signed that Blighty convention, all of that, of course non-binding. But then the UK Prime Minister came back after the summit and said, actually, you know what, we're not going to regulate AI for now. And so this shows you how difficult it is to strike that balance of encouraging competition and not stifling that competition, because this is a new transformative technology. I agree with Rana to an extent. Obviously, we debate this a lot. To an extent that this is a transformative technology. I've been working in machine learning since 2004, and I haven't seen anything and if you ask anybody that works in this space, we haven't seen such a a transformation like ChatGPT brought, right? We've been following transformers since 2017. I was at that conference when the paper was presented, all of that, right? But no, even OpenAI didn't know ChatGPT would be this transformational when they released it, right? So it's transformational. We should encourage innovation, and we should be very careful about stifling that innovation, specifically new entrants, right? New smaller startups trying to compete with OpenAI, Anthropic. They don't have a lot of resources, and this technology requires a lot of resources, right? And if we add a lot of onerous, regulation on top of that, that's going to be a problem, in my opinion.
So let me turn to Ramesh and talk about what you're doing at DIA to engage industry, particularly the startup community. And how can a small innovative company submit their ideas to DIA specifically, or even the broader DoD?
Thank you, Amy. So a couple of focus areas as the agency CTO. I'm focusing on two key areas, AI and quantum technologies. And actually this Monday, General Barrier, my CEO, Director Barrier, signed off on the DIA's AI strategy. We will be releasing that to the public at next week's DODAS Worldwide in Portland, Oregon. And it's a good step. It took us some time to get and listen to different perspectives, and it very much aligns with the NSC AI recommendation for us as a nation to build the necessary capabilities for speed and scale across different dimensions for us to be competitive with AI. And I also want to chime in to what Rana was mentioning. I concur with both Asube and Rana that AI is a mega trend. It's not like some small thing. For next 20, 25 years, it'll transform every single industry in every single country, and the companies who can leverage it effectively will turn out to be the winners. And people who don't use it effectively will probably be left out and probably may have to shut down sometimes, depending on the type of industry and sector you're in. So whether we like it or not like it doesn't matter, it's a mega trend. Right? It's similar to when electric car was invented or it's a big thing. The key is to really understand within your organization, your company, where is the value going to be created? The fundamental value creation requirements are missing. It is driven by technologists and scientists and doing something. That's not the real issue. Where do I create revenues, profits? What's my operating model? What's my business model? So those are the key questions. I think in most places it is being pretty much handled by CEOs, at least in the private sector and even in federal government. We have created a new role called Chief AI Officers. In fact, our first meeting is in this Friday at DNI. I am also the Chief AI Officer in addition to the CTO role. So we, as a national security community, are looking at it from different perspectives. So we have to understand the risk, right? I mean, at least in federal government, it's a very risk-driven decision. But there is also a different side of it, it's the speed and scale of innovation. So how do we balance the risk to get the desired outcomes for effective human-machine teaming? And it really comes down to requirements. It's not money. I mean, people go after money and all kinds of things, but if you don't know what you're doing, it doesn't matter. So the fundamental requirements and value creation, what is going to change? You're doing some function X with A, B, C. What is going to change with function X if you have AI? If I team a machine and human, what will change? What's the value created by that? But I tend to agree with Rana. It is not a small little incremental thing. It's a mega trend. And it is challenging for small companies. For example, moving from GPT-3 to GPT-4, the underlying infrastructure requirements is 100x more. Not 2x, 3x, 100x. So if you're the CIO and you have some budget for infrastructure and your team comes and tells, I need 100 times more money, I don't think government has that kind of money. So we have to figure out what it means. And it is important. In fact, I got a call from White House last week telling, hey, Ramesh, we got 6,000 people who can help you with AI. I told, are you also giving me the money? I mean, I don't mind taking people if you're coming with some budget. So there is a challenge. How do we shift our portfolios to effectively operationalize AI? So operationalizing AI is a trend we are embarking on.
Okay, thank you, Ramesh. Ron, I want to keep on this theme that Ramesh got us on of evolving AI and advancing AI. In the realm of national defense, right? So with that as context, what ways do you think companies like Behavioral Signals will contribute to this evolving landscape?
Yeah, so I mean, just to give you a quick overview of what we do, we're a DPI company that's focused on some certain specific modalities around voice interactions and voice conversations, but the specific modality that we focus on is extracting intelligence and signals from the tone of voice, which is how something is being said. So we're extracting a whole bunch of stuff like emotions, anger, happiness, sadness, behaviors like engagement, empathy, politeness, and then various other advanced states like experience, satisfaction, but also building newer models for stress, control, distress, and various intent models like predicting the intent to do an action or intent to not do an action. And all of this can be done real time, and a lot of these things are done real time in a conversation. So a technology like this obviously has applications in many different industries. We have a very specific focus on the commercial sector, where we're using this to augment human-to-human interactions that mostly manifest themselves in a call center. But on the defense side, I think there's even a bigger opportunity, and our exploration of those opportunities is relatively new, right? I mean, it's just it's a recent sort of foray into that, where we took our existing models, I mean, the existing capabilities that we've built, the existing engines that we have, and then applying it to solve slightly different problems, right? So you're looking at aspects such as monitoring and tracking a behavioral state of a human, and then and then pinpointing maybe variances from that behavioral state that might be interesting because of the type of interaction that you're having. Because we're not dependent on the spoken word, that offers a whole range of opportunities around potentially use cases that require language independence, language agnostic. It could be surveillance, it could be other things. And various other capabilities around getting into aspects of assessing someone's reliability or trustworthiness can offer a lot of value in various interactions where you're trying to gauge if the interaction that you're having with someone, like, you could be a walk-in with some information. How do you react to it? I mean, today it's a tough job. I mean, you have like, an individual human there reacting to that information and have to make a call, and AI can be a tool. I mean, obviously the goal is not to replace that decision making by AI, but offer another perspective, another tool to that decision making that needs to happen. So there's a lot of opportunities, and I mean, in fact, Ramesh and I had this conversation a couple of months ago in Amsterdam, and we were talking about the modes of thinking, right? So with any deep AI company, you're essentially first off looking at replicating the human brain function inside a non-human entity. And so you're understanding how a human brain does it, and then you're seeing if you can replicate that outside of the human brain. And so when you're looking at, decision making and the thought process, there's a lot of interesting work that's been done, but primarily by, the researcher Daniel Kahneman, and this famous book, Machinery of Thought. Some of you may have read it, but it sort of gets into two systems of thinking, right? So the human brain makes decisions, or the human thought process is really categorized into two systems: systems 1 and systems 2. Systems 1 is sort of like, the effortless, intuitive, almost sort of natural mode of decision making, which is like, you're looking at someone's facial expression and processing it. You're not really putting in too much compute on that. You're just instantly coming up with an assessment. And then the systems 2 is where you're doing math, or complex decisions on whether I should buy this car or not, and you're doing analysis in your head. And so if you look at how much time does a human brain spend on those two, 95% of our decisions on a day-to-day basis is systems 1 thinking, and only 5% of our decisions are systems 2 thinking. But when you look at AI implementations, especially in the defense and the ecosystem, almost all of those implementations are systems 2 implementations up till now. This is, you're processing lots of data, you're using a lot of compute to do it, and doing complex math, etc. And now we have this big opportunity to bring in the systems 1 thinking in conjunction with systems 2 to provide a whole range of capabilities that can be applied in the law enforcement, national security arena, cybersecurity. And so companies like ours that have been focused on building these models that play into the systems 1 thinking, emotions, intent, behaviors, and various aspects of state of mind, have a lot to offer in that spectrum. And I mean, we're fortunate, to work with partners like Intel who also have these, like, I'd say vision, forward-looking visions around what is possible, to go look at some of those use cases and then to go tackle that. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I predict that eventually in the next sort of like 4 or 5 years, you'd see the vast majority of the focus that the defense ecosystem, the federal ecosystem will have on the AI front will be in that spectrum, and so we're excited to be able to contribute to it.
Okay, terrific, thanks. So we're running out of time quickly, but I want to wrap this up, sort of what Ron has just talked about, Subi, and go to you, ask you to talk a little bit about the state of the global VC startup market in AI. And then we'll open this up for a question or two from the audience.
Sure. So, there is this famous or infamous, how you say it, Gartner hype cycle, where all technology sort of like follows that hype cycle, right? Like initially technology is very early, and AI has been there like since the 1950s or 70s, 80s. It went through those cycles. But now, it's becoming much more practical, right? I always say, like, I'm a practicalist. I'm not like, a techno-optimist. I'm not a doomer. I'm like somewhere in between, right? So as a practicalist, I see a lot of value being generated by generative AI, right? We're already seeing that. And the venture ecosystem, if you see, the amount of money that's going into these startups globally, last year, it was 5.1 total year. This 3 quarters alone is 21 billion. So it's almost like 3 times more, right, than last year. And so there is a lot of activity. There is a lot of innovation going on. Just the simple fact of scaling an autoencoder or a decoder-encoder kind of architecture gets us to this incredible language understanding is huge, right? So everybody's super excited about that. But also people are starting to ask what's the next wave is gonna be, right? After transformers, there is a lot of candidates that are floating around in research. What's gonna happen? What's gonna take us to be, so for instance, Rana talked about these neural networks being sort of crudely copied against how our brain works, right? But if you really compare transformers to how our brain works, we're way, way far away from that, right? Because our brain doesn't require supercomputers, right? It only expends 20 watts, but it does all of this stuff that we really depend on. So going from what Rana was talking about, this low-level, system one thinking, what is the breakthrough needed to go above and beyond that, to incorporate things like reasoning, things things that we do very naturally, right? Without a lot of hard coding, as Rana was mentioning, that we're doing today in the national defense community.
Okay, terrific. Hey, let's open it up for 1 or 2 questions from the floor. Does anybody want to? Here, thank you.
Any questions?
Thank you all. That was great. Asube, you referred to sort of the common big tech outlook on AI as being doomer. And I'm curious whether all of you think those are sort of sincerely held beliefs or buy into the more cynical, regulatory capture argument about that.
That's a very interesting question, right? So if you see, big tech, specifically cloud providers that are strategic investors in the top foundation model providers, they have an incentive, right, to be a doomer. And that is, it's not actually fearing regulatory capture, it's actually encouraging regulatory capture so that other new entrants, that could compete with their, bigger funded startups could have that onerous regulation, right? So that's the significant concern. But there's also people in Silicon Valley, like Eliezer Yudkowsky. He has also his own motives, but that sincerely believe that we really have to start bombing our data centers, right? It gets too extreme, and that's not helpful at all. Even you see, the doomers that are really more practical, they are influencing these, regulations, right? And that has a potential to stifle competition, specifically the open source community, that bifurcation into open source, it's vibrant now, but if we start to say, above this number of parameters models, now you have to, report about, where you got the data, the pre-training data, where you got, the model, how you train it, all of that, right? That's gonna be a lot of onerous regulation, in my opinion.
Yeah, I just want to chime in to Asube. So there's 3 aspects here, right? There's data, algorithms, and platforms. So typically, for most people, leveraging a platform makes sense because you cannot go and buy 50,000 GPUs overnight, and that's cost prohibitive for most people. Unless you already have a supercomputer in your company or agency, that's a different story. But majority of the people, access to platform and the cost to access as a service is a compelling story. Data is a whole different story, right? If you have data, you have more power. AI is extracting value from data. I would say protect your data, take care of it, and make sure you have a way to recover it if you terminate the contract with that platform vendor. How do you do that? Do you need a vector database on-prem? Where is the reference architecture? Right? Obviously, you don't want to lose your data, and then somebody runs some transfer learning model, and there's a whole parallel business that's competing with you now. So how do you protect your core intellectual property while taking advantage of this technology? And it affects everybody, it doesn't matter, not just government. It impacts everybody. So there are some real hard questions, right? Don't be too excited and outsource all your data and it's a one-way street. Hopefully we learned something from outsourcing of manufacturing in the 80s. So I think it's a balance. I mean, overall it works well. I tend to concur with my colleagues here, but everyone's situation is slightly unique. It's a convergence of data, platforms, and algorithms. For most startups, playing in the algorithms field is a lot easier. Jump on some big platform and the customer will come with the data. But let's make sure we protect that data and protect the intellectual property and have a strong operating and business model to move into the future with confidence and in responsible and safe manner.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Hi, my name is Grace Dilley from Meritalk. My question is for Ramesh. You mentioned that the DIA is coming out with your AI strategy next week. I was wondering if you could kind of tease a little bit about that or what to expect.
We looked at it holistically. I mean, we had listening sessions with every single combatant command, with Intel Service Center. It was a holistic thing. But we looked primarily across talent and skills, platforms and tools, tradecraft, mission priorities, and partnerships. Right? Across those 5 pillars, how do we holistically create a strategy that meets our national security priorities and we can create a sustainable capability? Because we do a good job with projects, but every project has a beginning and an end. And we want to really make sure we create a capability for the country working in collaboration with other sister agencies. But and I think in very short, it's very much aligned to the NSCAI recommendations. It's not too much off. It's 95% aligned to the NSCAI recommendations.
Great talk. I'm definitely understanding a lot of the focuses and pain points. I had a question about your current expenses, right? Like the current pain points that you guys are facing. And it could be just a pain point right now. It's like we don't know what the solution is, but right now it's just kind of like something it's low, it's expensive. Like, what are the top concerns there?
I think, well, obviously it depends on the type of problem you're solving. I mean, you may have different challenges. I'd say there's a lot of progression that's happened lately in terms of various approaches, whether that's on the the attention models or reinforcement learning, and so there's a lot of new capabilities that have come out. The biggest challenge I feel right now is still data. Back to Ramesh's point, we struggle with it on a daily basis. High quality data and data that is use case specific. We have this conversation with several, both the current and potential government partners. I mean, there are talks about like, okay, here's a problem statement. Do you think you can address this, and do you think you can solve this? And we take a look at our existing capabilities and the models that we have built and performed, and we have a very high sense of confidence, yes, we can get there. But we know that's hypothetical unless, we could actually allow a model to train on a data set that is relevant for that use case, and that data set typically doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. It hasn't been tracked. It hasn't been built. And so I think that's somewhat limited. And you also sort of see this play out on the LLM landscape. There's a bunch of competitors that have propped up. I mean, and the companies that have access to data, like OpenAI doesn't. I mean, they just scoured the internet. And I think GPT-4 has already processed everything on the web. So then 5, how will it progress? 5, 6, 7? And so, I mean, there's like, there's a plateau from a progression. Now there are these independent, these are competitive players coming out, like with, Twitter is one of the best data sets out there, or X, or whatever we're calling it now. And I mean, so there is that advantage that LLM will have, and certain other LLMs which may be, more have access to specific data sets. And so I feel, that's, we've seen that rapid growth, and then there's going to be a plateau, and not because of lack of tools or technologies, because there's still a lot of different things we haven't tried out yet, but because the data is not there, or the right kind of data is not there. We definitely feel it in our tiny little company with the small things that we're doing. I mean, we feel that we can't do X because we don't have the data for that. So I feel that, I mean, the synthetic data is a whole different ball game, but I feel that's the next thing to focus on, which will then do that massive leap going forward, which is like, and then there's this point of inflection where the data is no longer an limitation, and also it evens the playing field, because any company can go build an LLM and create synthetic data that requires for training, versus the big boys who have a lot of money, because OpenAI spends a lot of money buying data, right? So I think that's my perspective is the biggest challenge.
So we do need to bring today's session to an end. I want to thank our lovely panel for their deep insights. Please join me in congratulating them.